But notice today that it determines not only where we dwell on the earth, but also the times in which we dwell. In other words, the reason you and I are alive in North America in the year 2022 is because God has placed us here to serve our own generation for such a time as this. This generation of Christians is responsible for this generation of sinners. Have you ever heard someone say something like, I was born in the wrong time? Why couldn't I have been born in a simpler, easier time when life was slower and more carefree? Maybe you've even thought that yourself. Well, after the service this morning, you can get with my 85-year-old mother, and she can tell you about how much simpler and easier times were in those days. And there are other people older in our auditorium who can tell you a few things about that. But Ecclesiastes 7:10 warns, say not thou, what is the cause that the former days were better than these? For thou dost not inquire wisely concerning this. Every generation has its own advantages and disadvantages, its own privileges and challenges. And God made no mistake about whom he chose to live where and when. And God has placed us here and now to face the trials of our time. Notice how the Bible often says things like God raised up judges, or he raised up deliverers, or he raised up prophets, or he raised up kings, or he raised up people for one task or another. And in our day, he has raised up a generation of Christians to proclaim the truth to a generation of lost children, of hollow children, who've been deceived into hating the truth. And therefore, to them, the truth sounds like hate. Todd Wagner, the founder of Charity Network, said, the truth sounds like hate to those who hate the truth. Acts 13:36 says of King David that he served his own generation by the will of God, and then he fell asleep and was laid unto his fathers. David the giant killer. David the sweet psalmist of Israel. David, the king of Israel during its golden age. David, the flawed man. David, the penitent. He served his own generation. He was a match for the giants of his time because God placed him there specifically to fight them. He and a host of others whom God likewise placed there to serve their generation. And may God be able to say of each of us that we served our own generation by performing the will of God in our appointed time. And it is precisely because God orchestrated the where and the when of our lives that we can say with all boldness that we are the people appointed by God from before the beginning of the world to right the wrongs of our time and place. We are here and David isn't. So now let's take on the giants of our day as he took on his and his. Our forefathers in one generation established a church in the wilderness, a city on the hill where religious liberty could flourish and a new nation could be born. In another generation, the great battle was for our independence from tyranny. In another, it was for the preservation of the Union and the equality and freedom of all men. In another, it was to stop the Kaiser. In another, it was to stop the Führer. In another, it was to counter the Red Menace from engulfing the world. And now the great war of our time is over the soul of a nation that's lost its way.